brilliant dinner's ready. Let's see how it looks. Stop. Perfect. Today we are cooking up a storm as we are trying the Northern Monk / Aunt Bessie's collaboration set. These are 4 beers, all Sunday dinner / dessert inspired. Let's have a quick run through the beers, and more importantly, let's see how they taste and see if they actually do taste as they are described. So for dinner today, we have a roast dinner brown ale, followed by a trio of desserts. We have a Sticky Toffee Pudding and Custard Porter, a Jam Roly Poly and Custard Pale Ale, and a Apple Crumble and Custard Pale Ale. So before we get started tasting these beers, I'm just going to give a little context. So Northern Monk have released 2 of these beers previously. The roast dinner brown ale and the jam roly poly. I've actually done a video on this channel where I've made a jam roly poly using jam roly poly beer, basically replacing the milk with the jam roly poly beer, which turned out well enough, which I will link here. But yeah, I'm going to start with them 2 beers first because I have technically had them before. They might be slightly different recipes, slightly tweaked. But we'll go with them first and then we'll try the 2 new ones. So first of all, let's start with a main. Let's start with dinner. So the roast dinner brown ale. So as the name described, that is a brown beer. Quite dark, quite sort of copper coloured. Not brown in the sense of sort of dark like porters or stouts, but sort of, yeah, this sort of coppery amber colour. So from smell, that smells very much like a brown ale. A brown ale is a very traditional sort of real ale style. It's not really that trendy, I don't think, anymore in today's world. But yeah, that is a stereotypical brown ale. Smells are quite malty. Yeah, very much sort of malt forward, not very hoppy. Not really sweet, just a dark malty smell. So yeah, let's give it a try. So that's sweeter than it tastes. It's quite a nice sweetness there. Yeah, I mean, that is a brown ale for sure. Yeah, quite malty. Sweeter than I would think a brown ale is normally, but I could be wrong. Like I say, brown ales are not particularly a well-seen thing nowadays, I don't think. I'm not really getting any roast dinner vibes. I mean, I guess the reason they've gone for a brown ale is it's quite dark and I guess it's kind of going down the sort of gravy vibes. But must admit, not getting really any roast dinner flavours. It's just a decent brown ale. I mean, if anything, that sweetness might be trying to replicate sort of the gravy, like I say, the gravy taste. But it's a little bit too sweet for that. It needs to be like dark and malty and sort of very punchy for that, which it isn't. But yeah, before I fill up too much on main, let's jump into the desserts. So we'll get the other one cracked open, which is the ones that I've tried before, which is the Jam Roly Poly. So this is a Jam Roly Poly Pale Ale. They're all 4.5% by the way. I don't know if I've mentioned that, but they're all the beers are 4.5%. So it's a pale ale, so I'm going to be very light. Interestingly, when I'm pouring, the lightness of the beer was kind of having a little bit of a strawberry hue, or like a jam sort of tint to it. I don't know if that was just me, but in terms of the beer, that is not jammy at all. It is very much a pale ale, maybe a little bit darker, I'd say, than some pale ales, but yeah, that's pretty pale ale-y to me. Ooh. So, miles apart from the roast dinner one. That one does smell very sweet, very jam-like, raspberry, very, very sweet, but very, very jam roly poly like, with a whole heap ton of custard. So that one is ticking the boxes of the smell. A little over sweet. I feel like I'm getting sugar rush just by inhaling it. But anyway, let's see if it tastes as sweet as it smells. Thankfully not. Ooh, yeah. So that is a nice journey on the palate. Starts quite bitter, not bitter, but these traditional sort of pale ale flavours. You then get a wave of jam, a wave of raspberry, or I don't know if jam really opposed to raspberry or strawberry. I think the raspberry jam, more traditionally. But you get a wave of raspberry jam flowing through your mouth. And then it follows up with that custard, sweetness, vanilla. Yeah. So it's quite tart to a degree in the mouth, but that is the raspberry, I guess, doing its job of having a nice little tartness. But yeah, that flow of raspberry followed by that flow of custard is rather bizarre and rather interesting. In terms of the beer itself, maybe a bit thin. I mean, kind of going on with a topic I've had before on the channel about things being named after things, but when I'm having a jam roly poly with custard, that is a mouth, sounds weird, a mouth sort of coating experience. It's very sort of the custard being quite thick is quite mouth coating, and that's kind of what I'm hoping for here, but not quite. It's quite a thin pale ale, but that is really, I guess, to be expected. But yeah, that is pretty decent. Now, would I have a pint of it? Probably not. It'd probably get too much having this, in large volumes. But for a small can, a small size, I think when they released it originally, the Jam Roly Poly one, it was a big can. It was a 440ml rather than a 330. And I think I do remember sort of struggling towards the end as well. Whereas a 330ml can is probably perfect for these kind of really sweet dessert style beers. So it shouldn't be too much of a struggle to get through. Whilst my sweet tooth is kicking in, let's move on to the next one. Another pale ale, but this one is Apple Crumble. So one that I've not had before. Like I said, the ones before were released before. These next two are new for this sort of 4-pack that they've released. So in terms of coloration, this is a lot less cloudy, a little bit lighter hue if we compare it with the other one, which is probably where this sort of jam-like tint is what I saw earlier. You can see that the jam Roly Poly one is a little bit sort of pinky, whereas the Apple Crumble is quite clear, quite crisp, quite golden. So, flavour's not as, the aroma's not as sweet as the jam Roly Poly one, but this does smell very appley. There's a lot of apple flavour there, or apple aroma, with a sort of hint of sweetness from the custard, I guess, like a vanilla-y sweetness. So again, this smells pretty accurate to an apple crumble. So let's again see if it tastes as accurate. So this one is subtler. And it's not got quite as much as a free-stage sort of differential as the jam Roly Poly one. Very much in my mouth at the moment are flavours of apple, sort of spice, cinnamon sort of flavour. But I'm not getting that overriding sort of custard flow. I mean, like the last one, it was almost like I had a jam Roly Poly, a spoonful of jam Roly Poly, and then someone came in and poured the custard into my mouth. It was kind of that sort of additional flow, whereas this feels much more like you're eating it out of a bowl. You've got your apple crumble in the bowl, you've smothered it in custard, and you're getting one spoonful with a bit of everything. So I'd say in terms of a perfect sort of beer balance, this is more than the jam Roly Poly, but this doesn't have as much of a whack of flavour. It's very light apple, but I am getting a nice apple flavour in my mouth, but it's not like a sucker punch of apple in the face. The pale ale is more prominent here, like the flavour of the actual base beer is a bit more prominent. I am getting more of a pale ale sort of, I keep saying bitterness for pale ales, but pale ales aren't really bitter. They're quite punchy, they're quite hoppy, which hops do have if they've been dry hops, you tend to get a bit of bitterness. So that's probably where I'm getting that from. But this, you get a bit of bitterness from the pale ale, and then it fades away, and you get this sort of apple crumble, vanilla custard sort of flavour come through. So yeah, I'd say that is probably more palatable, more drinkable than the jam Roly Poly one. I could probably have more of this without getting sort of sweetness fatigued in the mouth. So I think it's time to move to a bit of a darker dessert with the Sticky Toffee Pudding. So final beer is the Sticky Toffee Pudding and Custard. So yeah, this one's a porter this time, so being a porter, I didn't say that before I started pouring it, so you might have been very confused while the other two have been pale ales. Yeah, this one all of a sudden came out a very dark colour. But yeah, that is a nice dark porter. Yeah. So in terms of smell, aroma, still get a little bit of sweetness from that custard note that is part of this beer. But I am also getting, yeah, a sticky toffee pudding sort of smell. So quite dark, quite sort of, you know, you can sometimes get a sticky toffee pudding that's a little bit overly burnt, like the caramel is kind of overcooked and burnt a little bit. I am kind of getting that smell, which is kind of what you want in a sticky toffee pudding. You don't want an undercooked one. You want one that's been really caramelised and really absolutely, you know, oof, like smack bang. Here's the caramel and here's this, you know. It's called sticky toffee pudding for a reason. You want it to be a bit sticky. You want it to be pretty sticky. So yeah, getting a darkness, getting a slightly sort of porter, traditional porter aromas, like sort of coffee-ish and chocolatey, which is why I guess they've gone for a porter, because it's a bit more darker to get that sticky toffee pudding darkness, dark caramelised flavour through. Oh yeah, I got a proper nice whiff of sticky toffee pudding there. So let's taste the final beer of this set. Not as prominent, not as easily identifiable as what it's trying to describe. Very dark, roasty, which is not very something that a sticky toffee pudding is normally, but definitely getting coffee vibes from this. I mean, it is a porter. That kind of comes part and parcel with that style. Yeah, I mean, this one is a lot harder to say what it is. I think it's the more... I mean, I do get a little bit at the end of a sort of sweet, date-like sticky toffee pudding sort of flavour. But the porter style is taking over more than anything. I think that's the problem with these sort of the darker side of these drinks, is that the dark, roasty, malty flavours are kind of overpowering whatever adjuncts they had to get the flavour or whatever they were trying to achieve. So it's a lot harder to find. I mean, I'm getting something from this as opposed to the roast dinner. I don't know what I was trying to find there. I think it was going more for the gravy vibes, but this, you do kind of get a sticky toffee pudding, a stickiness, a sort of overly, sort of slightly over caramelised caramel. So it is more true, I think, to a sticky toffee pudding than the roast in a brown ale was. As a beer, this is probably the most weird. I mean, out of the four, the ones that didn't taste much like what they're supposed to taste like were probably the ones that I would be able to drink the most of. I could easily have quite a bit of this because it's not overly sweet, whereas the pale ale, custard, jam roly poly, and apple crumble ones were a little bit sweet, quite heavily on the sweetness, which, I mean, the dessert style beers, they're quite sweet desserts in themselves, so it fits the brief. But in terms of a beer and how much I could probably have of that beer, they would be more of a struggle. But At the end of the day, these 4 beers are novelty beers, really. They are very much built on marketing push. I mean, people hear that there's a Aunt Bessie's beer or an Aunt Bessie's beer set or beer 4-pack. People are going to go and try and find it out. Thankfully, I stumbled upon this during my last shop at Morrison's. It was in the clearance section, so I imagine it is probably towards the end of been sold out, and that was the last box in the store. But for what they are, for novelty beers, they are all sort of good in their own right. They're not terrible. They're not sort of... I've had some beers from Northern Monk, the novelty side, that I think they should have thought about whether they should do it rather than, kind of that Jurassic Park line. They were too busy thinking if they could, they didn't think if they should. Now these all have I think they all were quite interesting in their own rights, but some I have had, I could not finish some of them drinks, whereas I can easily finish the rest of these. So all in all, that's going to do it. I'm going to stop waffling on. This video is probably long enough, and that will let's wrap up. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed my little haul of Aunt Bessie's Northern Monk collaboration beers. They all were kind of interesting in their own right. Some did work better than others. Some were more true to the flavour than others. But all in all, none of them were absolutely terrible, which is always good. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all them good things, and I will see you on the next video. Cheers.